Wisconsin Faith Voices for Justice. And we're going to get started. We have introduce yourself and your organization.
All right, my name is James Elder. I am Senior Advisor and Lead Organizer for the Wisconsin Poor People's Campaign. The Poor People's Campaign currently have approximately 30 state affiliates around the country, including Alaska. Of all places, I was kind of surprised to hear that, but glad to hear it at the same time. As some of you may be familiar with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. in 1967 before his assassination in '68. He had transitioned from a civil rights era, moving from the issues that started in Selma to voting rights and housing rights. Came to the conclusion at that point that what we needed was greater than just giving rights to a segment of the American population, and that it was the beginning of a call for a national moral revival so that we could speak to world issues. A lot of people at that time said that he was stepping out of his lane to talk about the Vietnam War, that he was stepping out of his lane to talk about healthcare, militarism, social economic issues. And it was determined that one of the biggest problems that led to the demise of the war on poverty was the continuation of the Vietnam War, where money was taken out of the fight against poverty and was issued instead to fighting wars. So that was just one of the issues, along with systemic racism. But the note that I will end on here at this point is that this is a poor people's campaign, but it's an American campaign because we're all poor when we point fingers at each other and say it's the other that is the problem or the issue and it's not me. So we have to recognize the fact that we're all in this together, and we are a poor nation if we do not fight against this poor issues that impact American people.
Thank you. So again, I'm Rabbi Bonnie Margulis. I'm the president of Wisconsin Faith Voices for Justice. We're an education and advocacy organization. We are statewide. We organize in congregations to and give them the tools and the education they need to be active in the public square, advocating for issues of social and economic justice. Wisconsin Faith Voices for Justice was part of an effort 3 or 4 years ago to get a movement going here in Wisconsin based on Reverend William Barber's Moral Mondays movement in North Carolina. And Reverend Barber came to Madison and then subsequently to Milwaukee, met with, we had about 40 people from different organizations and congregations and individual activists who met with Reverend Barber and heard about his work in North Carolina and got some training from him. And for various reasons, the first go-around of trying to get this off the ground didn't quite work, but after the 2016 election, my organization brought together a couple of meetings of clergy and activists and faith leaders, individuals, and had a chance to kind of debrief from the election and to scream and shout and cry, and then pick ourselves up off the floor and figure out what did we want to do, what was the role of the faith community in this new environment. And one of the things that grew out of this was a renewed passion and commitment for the work that Reverend Barber has been doing in North Carolina. So we've been working for the last 1.5 years almost to put forward together Wisconsin, a moral movement. Wisconsin Faith Voices for Justice is the backbone organization, but it is not strictly a religious movement that we are building. It is, we hope, a statewide umbrella for all the different organizing efforts that are going on around the state, to have a hub, to have a place where we can share what we're all working on, we can learn from each other, we can help support each other's work, we can maybe not recreate the wheel and not duplicate effort so much. If we know what we're all doing, we can be more strategic and more planful. And just to give you just the first bit of Forward Together Wisconsin's mission statement, we are a nonpartisan, statewide, inclusive, and diverse coalition of individuals and organizations led by faith, philosophy, personal conviction, or experience. We're committed to sound and ethical public policies, laws, and strategies for every level of society. We seek to build the power of our unity, affirm the humanity of every person, uphold the stewardship of the natural resources that sustain us, and preserve the moral foundations of our society. We are not about us versus them. We're about working together for the common good, rooted in equality and justice. Tim?
Okay, my name is Tim Corden. I'm a Unitarian Universalist. In fact, I got a job this past year as a social justice coordinator for First Unitarian Society, and that's kind of opened up my life. It's really a dream job. I can finally get paid a little bit for making social justice, or not making social justice, but trying to help make it. Anyway, a lot of my friends are in this room. People like Datsa and with the network, and Bonnie, I've worked, and John Peck with Family Farm Defenders, and I mean, a lot of us know each other. And a lot of you that do know me, I've been really frustrated for years by the fact that there's so many causes for the earth, for labor, for women, for children, on and on and on, immigrants, and every day my email inbox is just flooded with people wanting my time, my treasure, my talent, asking me to help in the good fight. You know, and what I've come to realize long ago is that there isn't one good cause, that all of our causes matter. And so I've been talking to friends and saying, we've got to pull together. And of course, how can we pull together without going to the backbone of this movement, groups like the Wisconsin Network for Peace and Justice, or the Wisconsin Grassroots Network. So I went to them, I went to John, who was with Family Farm Defenders, and I said, let's pull together, let's try to build one movement that embraces all of us and leaves nobody else. And people started responding positively, and that's, so we've also, the Unitarians, James Reeve, have been doing this monthly potluck called Sustainable Saturday Night, with a different program every month, on the theme of peace, justice, sustainability, or promoting democracy. And last January, we didn't have a program. The program people we were going to have ended up dropping out. They couldn't do it. And I said, you know, I've always had this dream of doing something called Our New Year's Revolution. And let's invite people from Black Lives Matter movement, from environmental movement, from the labor movement, from women's movement. Let's try to invite a lot of big leaders and see what happens, and ask them all, what will it take for us to all come together and build one big movement? And we did that, and out of that, this project kind of grew. And now Grey Panthers have signed on, WNPJ has signed on. That's my 2 minutes. But we're really not a new group. We really want to support the Poor People's Campaign, Forward Together Wisconsin, WNPJS, and all of the different groups that really need to pull together and build one big people's movement, a moral movement. And I think we're all coming together is really what's happening.
Hi, my name is Datsa Zeps, and I am the administrator for Wisconsin Network for Peace, Justice, and Sustainability. We are a network of organizations and individuals who formed about 26 years ago. It started as a peace movement, but as everybody here knows, peace is not attainable when there is injustice in the world. And a lot of injustice plays out in communities that are unfairly targeted for as dumping sites. So we bring in the environmental aspect as well. We have over 150 member organizations from all sorts of different walks. So we have people who are politically oriented. We have several independent parties that are members of our organization. We have faith-based groups that are members of the organization. We have grassroots groups, little teeny peace groups from Eagle River or Grandmas for Peace up in Superior. Grandmas for Peace is actually a very large group, but when you look at the number of people in that group in Superior, it is definitely a small grassroots group. Many of them are national organizations with branches here in Wisconsin, or chapters or locals. Our grannies are a member of Wisconsin Network for Peace and Justice, which only makes sense, duh. But what we do is we amplify the voices of all of those groups. And when those groups are working on issues that are similar, we try to help those groups come together and maybe have a larger presence within the state. Because when you're a little group like Grandmas for Peace up in Superior, and you need to get a hold of the people in Duluth or Eagle River or whatever to get a broader voice, that's something that we can do. We have a website, we have a calendar, we put together issue templates, and hope to do more and more of that. Thanks.
Thank you. So our next question for all of us was to talk a little bit about what our successes have been so far for however long our organizations have been around, and what are some of the challenges that we're facing today.
Okay, I will start off by saying, first of all, I approach everything I do with the greatest sense of humility. And on that basis, I recall when I was growing up in Chicago and doing community organizing as a teenager, I saw the world through a very narrow perspective. And if you didn't agree or align with me, you were wrong. I was right. But age and maturity broadens the perspective as well as the horizon, even as time evaporates on the horizon. And I come to realize that the greatest challenge for all of us, I've never met an inactive activist. We are all generally consumed in a number of given passions that we pursue and chase. And with that, we know that if you go back to Sun Tzu or any Greek military approach, it has always been about divide and conquer. We are more numerous. We are more powerful than our adversaries who choose profit over people. But they have divided us, and then over time we began to subdivide ourselves. One of the things that we're trying to do with the Wisconsin Poor People's Campaign is to communicate, collaborate, and coordinate. What can we do together to be successful? And I think the division is the greatest challenge that we face, because our success, even with the past election, would have been an easy win if we weren't so busy pointing fingers at what others were doing wrong, rather than trying to figure out where do we align with each other and what can we get right. Because to me, activism, social justice is the equivalent of moral justice, and it is always about moving the ball forward every day. How can you move the ball forward? So I think we've got a lot of challenges, but challenges that can be overcome with unity and inclusion of all of us, young, old, and regardless of race or economic conditions.
Thank you. That was amazingly succinct. Thank you. So Forward Together Wisconsin, as I said, has been working for almost a year and a half. We've done some actions at the Capitol. We had an event a year ago at the Capitol. It was a vigil for social and economic justice, and we had different faith groups and communities coming together to lift up issues around environment, education, human rights, LGBTQ rights, and had just a wonderful turnout and had amazing, beautiful speeches from some of our leaders about some of these issues. And we're able to lift up in the state capitol these issues as issues of morality, issues of justice, issues that reflect the values of who we are as Wisconsinites. We also had an event called Trashed, Don't Trash Our Healthcare, because we're trying to lift up people's personal stories and people's lived experience. There's nothing more powerful than hearing from people who are the experts of their own lives and know what their challenges are and what they're facing. And we particularly wanted at that time to lift up the stories of people who had been positively affected by the Affordable Care Act, and to have them share their stories of how the policies of the Affordable Care Act helped them access needed health care and what the effect would be on their lives if they lost those protections. We had somebody from Tammy Baldwin's office who attended the event and brought those stories back to Tammy. And our Congress people look to us as experts. They really do. We think that they're the experts, but we know so much more than they do about what happens in our own lives. And when they talk to their colleagues about the policies and the legislation that they want to support, it helps them so much to have these personal stories. So we were able to provide that for one of our legislators. Since then, we have over 100 activists who are part of our organization. A lot of the groups that Tim mentioned are also part of Forward Together Wisconsin, and we're working now on a strategic planning process for the next 2, 5, and 10 years, where we want this movement to go, and how do we see it having a positive effect on our state, on our legislatures, and really on changing the conversation. And part of that is exactly what James says, bringing all of our different groups together. We're all doing the same thing. We all have the same values. We all have the same goals. It would be so much stronger and more effective if we could all work together.
Thank you. I'm going to invite Tom and John and Martina, Mary Kate, some other members of kind of the Unity team to pipe in if I forget anything. But basically, the Building Unity project, again, doesn't really want to see itself as a new organization on the block, but rather, how do we pull us all together? And how do we get one calendar and one people's movement? And I think it's very much what the rest of us want to do too. So there's redundancy in our goals. How do we unite? How do we get our egos out of the way? And I would say that's probably our biggest struggle, is how do we sever our identity with our group? How do we become one people's movement? And I think that the main thing to do is to really get in touch with our roots. The 30-year-old, Wisconsin Network for Peace and Justice is like the backbone of Wisconsin. We've got the new kids on the block, like Our Wisconsin Revolution. They're doing great work, and we need to pull and unite with them. What about the NAACP, doing work for racial justice? Can we pull together with the NAACP? Can we pull together with the churches that have been doing justice work? We want to get outside of Madison, and we really feel like our next, Building Unity, our next push is going to be to try to have what we might call a Chautauqua that moves around the state. Stevens Point. We've been to Stevens Point once for a full-day workshop event, and it went really well. We want to get to Wausau. We want to get to Superior and Fond du Lac and, you know, La Crosse and what have you, and really raise the issues. What should the name of this movement be? Should it be called the Poor People's Campaign? I don't know. I think that when we have everyone at the table, when the indigenous people of this state are at the table, when the people of color, when our Latino neighbors are at the table, when youth are at the table, when we really have a movement that's not just the same old usual suspects, the gray hairs that we've seen over and over again. Nothing wrong with gray hair now, don't get me wrong. But we're really wanting to pull together a diverse movement, and I think then we can name ourselves, and then we can call ourselves what we are. But it needs to be an environmental movement, like the Poor People's Campaign is saying. It needs to be anti-militarist, anti-war. We need to bring the peace dollar back to build the needs, to build for the transition, and we need to build unity around that. So I think we're all on the same page, and the real question is, how do we do this? And I think it starts with all of us really raising our imaginations about having that kind of unity movement and saying, I'm not a single issue person. I'm for peace, justice, sustainability, and democracy. Anything that erodes any of those things has to be stopped before it's too late.
Hi. Successes and challenges. Wisconsin Network for Peace and Justice and Sustainability has been around for 26 years. We celebrated 25 years last year in hopes, and loudly in hopes, that these sorts of things would come to the network and work with the organizations that are already there. However, nothing is clear, and everything is in silos. People have their passions and their expertise, and they know what they're talking about within their groups. And the challenge is to help those individuals realize that that particular silo issue is not a silo issue, that it translates into everybody else's issue. My passion is racial justice. And I wear it on my shirt and my sleeve. And it plays out in just about everything that we do, whether it be war, taking over somebody else's country because they've got the oil that we want, and destroying it. There's a beautiful article in, I think it's the New Yorker, but I'm not really quite sure. It's an article written by somebody who was 12 years old, and the title of that article is When America Came and Destroyed My Country. And we do that because we think we have the privilege of going and taking their shit. That's their shit. We don't need their shit. We got our own shit. And we don't even take care of that very well, right? So there are things that play out in every single silo that affects everything. So writing about racial justice and how it affects war, how it affects the people, how it affects the economy, how it affects your brain, what you've been taught, how you've been taught it, and why you can't break out of your silo, and why you won't work with somebody who's working on the same thing that you are. These are the challenges, to get rid of my issue is not your issue. Oh, but it is. It is so very much your issue. And if you don't help the least of us, the best of us is going to, the most of us, I guess, is going to take over everything else. You know that they own, and it's not a they, it's a thing. It's not really people. They end up, people end up profiting from it. But it's the mechanism by the way that the money is created, and it just goes and goes and goes and goes. And right now it's going into war. It is the most disruptive thing that it can possibly be. But the reason that we aren't taking it back is because it does help a lot of people. And we get residuals from that, and we also get privilege from that. And we don't want to give that up. So we need to really look at how it is that we are affecting other people's lives and take responsibility. Again, challenge. It's a huge challenge. Successes? Successes are breaking down those walls. WNPJ has trained over 6,000 white people to talk to more white people about how racism plays out in this state. 3 years ago, 4 years ago, I could say Madison, Wisconsin is the most incarcerated city in the most incarcerated county, in the most incarcerated state, in the most incarcerated nation, in the entire world. I can't say that anymore. That makes me a little bit happy. But we're still very, very incarcerated, and it still plays out by race. It plays out by race and how people are policed in the city of Madison. But that's a huge success. We've trained 4,000 people, or 4,000 people. Those 4,000 people are having living room conversations. They are having their own trainings. I don't even know how many more people. Are we at that 200,000 person tipping point yet? Where 3.5% of the population is necessary to have that sea change? I don't think we're there yet, but I'm waiting for that sea change because I think that sea change, that racial sea change for white people is going to bring about a peaceful, more sustainable, and a more just society.
So our last question for all of us, and then we'll open it up for discussion, was what would ultimate success look like? At what point could we say, we're done, we're closing our doors, we're going home, we're not needed anymore?
I'll try to navigate to that answer if you could just bear with me a moment. When I was a child and I heard the biblical stories about justice and read and heard about Jesus and justice and serving the poor. This was in the house. I lived on the west side of Chicago. When I went outside, there was this thing called street justice. And you had to fight for it because nobody was just offering it up and giving it to you. If you didn't fight for it, you were a constant victim of the bullying and everything that came along with that. As I claimed my place in those streets to be able to walk them day or night without my parents, I come to realize that there's this contradiction and conflict. And you look at the ideal of the Constitution, something that I believe in wholeheartedly. When I was in the 7th grade, I had made a commitment that my plan was to become a U.S. congressman for 3 terms and then become a U.S. senator. And as I became a teenager, I started working in community organizing, and I got in the back room, fortunately or unfortunately, with real politicians. And I saw the negotiating and the deal making and the payoffs and all that goes on, as they say, politics is the art of the possible, with a lot of money and leverage being kicked around. If you didn't have voice, you didn't get that. In a city ran by the master himself, Richard J. Daley, he took care of those who took care of him. So I see what success ultimately looks like is that, if some of you may recall the song by John Lennon, Imagine. In my most idealistic moment, I imagine that also. but I know that it's something that we have to fight for. But when you have a state that where African Americans are 5% of the population, but represent 50% of the inmates, they've turned social injustice into a corporate business. Where you look at Ferguson and what was happening there, that they're running the city government off the backs of poor people. This will remain a problem as long as the vast majority of Americans say it's happening to the other and it's not happening to their America. The NAACP has been working and fighting this fight for over 100 years. Every African American, every Latino, they see the conflict and the injustice and they recognize it for what it is. But until America as a whole starts to see that they're poor as a result of the poor being attacked, then we will never be who we're capable of being. And so success ultimately looks like, and I don't know, when I talked to a pastor this morning and asked him the question, do you think that we would ever have a truth commission here in the United States? We've never gotten over addressing the issue of the first sin of slavery, and so we have not had that honesty from within. The greatest challenge we all face each day is being honest with ourselves and recognizing even our own conflicts of justice, be it in a marriage relationship, or your parent-child relationship, your neighbors, or the society as a whole. But until we can come to truth that the burden that's on poor people is the burden on America, we must all face this together or we all fail together.
So, Forward Together Wisconsin has two main overarching goals, and one is to change the conversation around our state, to help people to have exactly those conversations, to have the hard conversations, to talk about the things that Dotsa and that James were talking about that we don't talk about enough. I mean, we kind of feel like maybe we here in this room talk about it a lot, but we don't have the perspective of what's going on around the state and who's having these conversations and who isn't, and what effect is that having. And then the other part of that goal is to bring those conversations to our elected officials. I was listening on the way over here from Madison. I was listening to the radio. I was listening to what's going on in DC today, and listening to the speeches that these amazing young people are making. And over and over and over again, they all made the same point that we have strength in our voices. We have to raise those voices. We have to make them loud and clear, and we have to use those voices to register and vote. And that was their refrain constantly. Who's registered? They were asking everybody, and they were registering people then and there. Who's registered? Who's going to register? Don't just register, but educate yourself and go vote. Don't just register and educate yourself. Register and educate your friends and your family and your neighbors and your community, and make sure that everybody goes to vote. So to us, I think success would be that our conversations are deep and our conversations are real, and we confront the hard questions and the hard realities, and have that Truth and Reconciliation Commission, not just in DC, but everywhere around the country, and not just the sin of slavery, the sin of disenfranchising our Native population and decimating our Native population, the sin of what we are doing to our immigrant brothers and sisters. And there's so many ways in this country that we are nowhere near standing up to our ideals of being that shining city on the hill. So changing those conversations, making that happen, and making our elected officials accountable to us, accountable to our values, accountable to what we care about as people of Wisconsin, not accountable to the big corporations, not accountable to their big money donors. but accountable to what we as people need, what will make our lives sustainable, and what will make our environment sustainable. So making sure that our elected officials recognize the inherent worth and dignity of every human being and have that uppermost in their minds when they talk about policies, when they talk about priorities, when they talk about legislation, that they are with us in mind, not with the corporations, not with the big donors, not with what's going to get me reelected, but what's really going to be good for our people and for our state and for our country. When that happens, that's when we can close our doors and say, we're done, we did what we needed to do. When the systemic things that keep people in poverty, the systemic policies that keep destroying our earth, the systemic policies that prioritize war and prisons and things that generate money for politicians, when those priorities are switched over to prioritizing making sure everybody has health care, everybody has education, everybody has a safe, secure house to live in, everybody has heat in that house, everybody has a life that's free of violence and coercion and degradation. That's when we're ready to close our doors, when we've shifted that dynamic and made the world into the world that we've always envisioned and really want it to be.
I can hardly say it better than what these two have just said. I'll just say ditto to all of that. And stress also that we have to totally and completely reinvent ourselves from a sustainability standpoint. The way we get into automobiles and drive around this world like we can go wherever we want, whenever we want, even to do justice work, it isn't working, it's not sustainable. And that's why we have pipelines, and that's why we have, wars in the Middle East. And I mean, it doesn't justify it, of course, but we have to get to a totally sustainable way of living. And if we try to do that, and we reckon with our sins, of racism and genocide and sexism and homophobia and everything. I mean, we really just have to embrace everyone, including the animals and the fish, the land, the rocks, the soil. And that's going to be no small task. So we've got to get to work. It's an all hands on deck moment for humankind. Because if we don't do this soon, I'm afraid it's going to be too little, too late. In fact, some of us, I know in this room, already feel it's too little, too late. I've talked to some of you, and I know you already think that.
We don't need to stay there, though.
Huh?
We don't need to stay there.
We don't need to stay there. So my hope is that we will really just keep inspiring each other to create the Hail Mary pass at this 11th hour and really bring it home for the kids with unity.
So, I am one of those people. I think our time on this planet is very, very short, and I hope that I am wrong. And I work as if I am wrong, but I sincerely believe that my grandchild will not reach 40. He's 17 right now. I think we are on a path to destruction. I think 20 years ago was when we needed to put the car to bed. Because everything that we do, everything that is happening right now is the result of what we did 20 years ago. So all of the degradation that has happened up until this time, today, is still yet to be played out 20 years from now. I drove across the country on a bus because I can't afford the train, but I'm not going to fly unless I'm going to go over the lakes, the big ponds, right? So I'm driving across last summer, and I wake up and I realize that fully a fourth of the trees are all dead. They're dead. They're dead. Nobody cut them down. Nothing, I mean, they're just dead. We killed those trees. I don't know which trees they are, maybe there's a couple of species, but my brother brought it to my attention, and I started watching while I was driving on the bus. And when I go down to Salt Lake this summer, I suspect that I will see the same thing, more dead trees. What will success look like? Success, those trees aren't coming back, unless we've got the seeds someplace. I think success will look much different than what we think success is going to be. I think there will be far fewer people on the planet. I think there will be far fewer species on this planet. I think much will be underwater. I think success will be people working together to ensure that there is still a population on this planet that is called human. We will be much smaller. We will be doing things that we used to know how to do and we'll have to relearn how to do. We will not be using a whole lot of powered things unless it's powered by the sun. It will be very different. I am sure that it will be very different. And it will be hard, and people will need to sacrifice. But if people don't sacrifice each other, we should come out on the other side a better species than we are right now.
So our panel's been joined by Nate Tim. Hi.
Hi there. Thank you.
So we've each shared about our organizations and our kind of mission statement and our successes and challenges. Do you want to say a few words?
Sure. Sorry I was down wrapping up a few details. And thank you all for being here. And this is a great panel and a great session. Well, WGN's mission has always been to organize at the community level. That's our first obligation. And we've connected a number of different community grassroots groups around the state through that network. Then our next mission was to organize regionally. And we've taken a shot at that through our regional organizing. And we had a session today under the Power Up strategy, which is organizing on a Senate district basis. So it always feels like we're pushing the envelope because we are. We're trying to do new things in a new way. And that's why I'm not so disenchanted. I mean, I've been through so much disenchantment that I'm kind of tired of that. Optimism rests in the human heart. And despite all of the naysaying and abusive things that are going on, our hearts can be optimistic. We can direct our own hearts. We can direct our own minds. And we can think about new and creative things. My background is history. So, I've studied, I'm aware, you are too, of throughout the eons, there's been rises and falls of civilizations. So that we're in a bit of a dark space now. Doesn't mean that we have to stay in that dark space. It doesn't mean that we will stay in that dark space. We'll only stay there if we let it stay, let ourselves stay there. Because all of those are human creations. Humans have created the climate issues that we have now. Humans have created the authoritarian governments throughout history. And they've also created some non-authoritarian governments. And they've overthrown authoritarian governments. So let's not be too down. If we're down, we're just doing what those authoritarians want us to do. They love to have a submissive audience. And they love to have us be depressed and disheartened. The best thing to do about being disheartened is to get involved and do something positive. That is therapy for being disenchanted and disheartened. And that's part of the reason why I'm not so disheartened. because I'm doing a lot of stuff. And I'm doing a lot of stuff that has hope. And it doesn't hurt that I'm kind of a spiritual person and kind of see things in a different dimension than the here and the now. So, and most of you are that way too. You think in a dimension beyond the here and the now. And that doesn't mean you're, belong to some secular religious denomination. It means that you have a worldview that transcends the here and the now. When you talk about your grandchildren, that's what you're talking about. So, the nitty-gritty is that the call to us is we have to do some concrete things. We can't just spend time doing what we're doing right now. So we have to do some of this. We have to talk about where the future needs to go. We have to do visioning, but then we have to get from the chit-chat stage to the visioning, clear visioning of what the directions need to be, to actually organizing, action, the action stage. That's where we've not been so good, especially on the progressive liberal side, because we have this curse, the curse of splintering, the curse of the perfect, the enemy of the good. Four of us could sit down and we could list over 100. I was on a panel like this one time, and we list 250 things that were wrong. Okay? We spent the whole last half of the panel listing things that were wrong. And what did we do with those 250 things that were wrong? I'll give you a guess. Nothing. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. It was all on a blackboard, and they erased the blackboard, and that was it. Okay? You've been in those groups before. So let's not do that anymore. Let's not do that political bullshitting. It's enjoyable to do that with one another, show how smart we are, that we can come up with those 250 things. What good does that do us? We know a few things. But we also should know we don't get a lot done that we should be getting done. And so part of our call is to push ourselves down a little bit. It's not about us as individuals. It's about how we can work together and how we can devise strategies of what we can do together. And we make those strategies concrete. I'm going to do this, and Tassa's going to do that, and we're going to do it together. Okay? So, and then, we do a little project, and then we figure out maybe how to do a little bigger project. But it's got to be concrete stuff, not just general philosophizing and bullshitting. That's not getting us anywhere. So that's what I've learned in the approximate decade that I've been involved with grassroots organizing. We haven't gotten to places that I would like to have gotten, but that's life. Your dreams don't always get realized. But who would have thought 10 years ago we'd be here today doing what we're doing today? We started with a very small group of local people and in the middle of a snowstorm.
7 inches.
And here we are.
160 people, 7 inches of snow, and they still showed up.
So that's kind of my take. I think I've said probably more than enough. Thank you.
Thank you. So we have a little time, and wanted to open it up for questions, comments. Vicki is very eager.
I am very eager.
I'm going to just say we have about 8 minutes. We're supposed to do 2:15. So just as I gave us a 2-minute time limit to give our elevator speech, I'm going to give you all a 1-minute time limit so that we can hear from as many people as possible in our next 8 minutes.
Well, mine's actually a question, but so I'm seeing here, with this group of people, a lot of overlap. I'm seeing a potential tendency to have a little competition about which group's gonna be the one, but I don't subscribe to that. I'm seeing that people can work together and that there are different aspects of what everybody's doing in each of these groups. And I guess my question is, if there's a way that you could each quickly express what you think the strength in terms of real specific capacity is of your organization, or your focus and your reach would be, so we can kind of hear, am I making sense about that? What is it that your organization specifically does that might be different from what the other ones do, or might be your strength, and what is your reach in terms of who you might be networking with, connecting with?
Well, I've been asked the why question, right? Why do we need a Poor People's Campaign? And if that's the case, why do we need any organization to fight any of these systemic issues? And I would say that every voice is important in this fight, and every voice needs to engage in this fight. Part of this, you always hear about leadership. You seldom hear about followership. You can't have the one without the other. And part of an effective leader or leadership is listening and finding where there is synergy. If someone is more effective in a given area, then you should align behind them and follow. If that isn't there, then you should put it in place. So I think that there is some redundancy. There are great opportunities for us to be successful. Tim and Rabbi Bonnie and I have been talking about how we can get together on some key issues, but I've been having this conversation around the state. I'm continuing to have this conversation. We've got the support of Micah and some other groups, but I will continue to have this conversation. If I can quickly here, I think of each of us as a droplet of water, okay? You keep dropping in the same spot, you can dent metal. But if you were to put those droplets together, perhaps you can form a dipper of water, okay? And feed several people. But I'm looking at how do we become a mighty, powerful stream that cannot be resisted in terms of making change. And that's all of us coming together for a single cause to have the greatest possible impact. So that's what I'm seeking. I refuse to give up hope. I'm gonna fight till I can't fight, till we get the change we need. I don't say it's going to be nirvana, but I believe that we can improve people's lives. Sometimes it's a little kid, to prevent that little kid from drinking lead water and damaging their brain for the rest of their life. That's success.
Thank you. Well, I completely agree with what you're saying and what you said. And in the interest of full disclosure, Vicki is on my board and is helping us to spearhead Forward Together Wisconsin. And there is a lot of overlap, and James is right, we have been having conversations and will continue to have conversations, the four of us really, about how we can all work together. And I think the strength of building this coalition and this movement is that we each have different areas of strength, both in terms of what we each personally bring, in terms of our own personal experiences in areas of expertise or areas where we've been doing this work and have certain experiences to bring to the table, but also in terms of our organizations, we each have a slightly different focus. Some of us also have slightly different geographic focus. Working with like John Peck at Family Farm Defenders, helping us to reach out beyond the Madison-Milwaukee bubble, Wisconsin Network for Peace, Justice, and Sustainability, also helping us to reach out of our bubble. That's really what our strength and our capacity is in this coalition that we're building. And, you know, I hope that we're not setting up competition, but that we're finding ways to pool our efforts and work together.
Absolutely. Let's have another question. What do you think? Did you want to
Well,
speak to
I
that?
was
Go
just
ahead.
going to say that one of the things that people need to remember is that everybody comes to all of this work from their own place. And sometimes they have to have a different avenue to get to the center, so to speak. So somebody might take Main Street, somebody might take, you know, South Street, somebody might take, you know, and still get to that same point. So I think that, so we've got our member groups, many of the member groups that you've got are the same, but our individual members are more than likely not going to really overlap all that much. There will be people who will be coming in individually to every single one of these groups with a different sort of agenda that informs the entire picture. So I think the strength in each individual group, if we were to ensure that we and then our boards are always talking, so that when there is that, help, that we all know that that call went out and we show up.
Thank you.
Can I ask a calendar question? I'm aware of, and, you know, for people that are not aware, John, and people that you work with, I'm guessing, put together a calendar. And it's very helpful when there is going to be an event that's open to, let's just say, open to the community, that people know about it and know how to connect with the calendar. I think you mentioned working on a calendar. What kind of progress is being made just to share the, you know, that kind of information?
So Wisconsin Network for Peace and Justice and Sustainability does have a calendar. I get close to 100 emails a day, some of them with 10 or 15 events on there. I need volunteers to help me populate that calendar.
And how is it, I mean, do you organize it like county by county, or
It
how?
can be sorted any way you want it to be sorted, and it can be pulled any way that you need it to be pulled. It can be pulled by city, it can be pulled by region, it can be pulled by activity, it can be pulled by, is it racial justice, is it sustainability, is it this, is it that? We could even, like, make even more categories so that people can run queries on it, specifically on labor, specifically on women's rights. Or it could be, you know, Milwaukee, you know, and it could do all of those things. But without the data into that calendar, it would be really hard. We used to have more people doing it and more people from the member organizations adding this stuff on themselves. But training gets lost and people get moved and things don't happen. But we can, WNPJS can provide that calendar.
But you need some
But
volunteers.
I really can't do it myself, all myself.
I think that that's where our coalition building really comes in, because there's no reason why we need 6 different calendars.
same
And
calendar?
There's at least 6 different calendars.
Well, the
out
calendar
there.
I do feeds into that one. Mine is just for Madison area,
Right,
Yeah.
and mine's statewide.
but through.
Right, so I mean, why should we all have different calendars when WNPJS has a fabulous and searchable calendar? But our task maybe is to help recruit those volunteers to help you. So if we all work together, we increase our capacity tremendously. DOTSA works, what, 10 hours a week? And, well,
I get paid
that's what
10
she
hours
gets
a
paid
week.
for. Wisconsin Faith Voices for Justice is all volunteer. I don't get paid at all. We can help increase our capacity by working together, and DOTSA saying to me, this is what I need, can you help me? And my saying to her, this is what I need, can you help me? And then we help each other, and then it's not a competition, it's working together in partnership.
What's the email that we need to pile on into needing more volunteers with our events?
Well, we all have our own emails.
What I'm saying is, what email address should we use if we have an event that we want on that calendar?
info@wnpj.org. And that feeds into a volunteer Gmail account that several people have access to. You know, ideally, what we would be putting up on our website, and our website is currently undergoing development. It will be accessible more when we release the new WordPress. So ideally, what we have on there is petitions, events, and actions within that smaller scheme of things. And then within the larger scheme of things, resources for education purposes within the various activities. Or maybe even just pointing back to, you know, hey, if you want to do this, you know, go and talk to, you know, Faith Voices. If you want to do this, go and talk to Building Unity or Wisconsin, you know, depending on what it is, you know, so. info@WNPJ